Balcony smiles. Private rupture. It was meant to be a moment of triumph, a tableau of unity framed against the Buckingham skyline. Cameras flashed, trumpets blared, and the royal family stood shoulder to shoulder on the palace balcony as the crowd below erupted into cheers. At the center, King Charles waved with a weary but genuine smile, his hand occasionally brushing against Camilla's gloved one. For the millions watching, it was another carefully choreographed image of stability after years of turbulence. But to those of us standing behind the curtains, the illusion had already begun to fracture. That day, I remember the small details more vividly than the spectacle: the way Camilla kept adjusting her bracelet, her eyes darting not toward Charles, but somewhere beyond the crowd. The stiffness in his posture when he turned toward her. What the cameras didn't capture were the hours leading up to that balcony appearance. Separate cars had brought them to the palace, separate dressing rooms, separate briefings. They had exchanged no words until the very moment they stepped into public view. Rumors had been swirling for months by then. The palace corridors, normally echoing with ceremonial calm, had filled instead with whispers, discreet exchanges between staffers, unusual security arrangements, unexplained schedule changes. The official story was that the Queen Consort preferred spending more time at Ray Mill, her private Wiltshire estate, for rest and quiet reflection. But the truth, as always, lived in the spaces between those words. Camilla's quiet reflection coincided with periods of visible strain on the king. Aides described him as distracted, prone to long silences in meetings, sometimes even skipping traditional morning briefings. The Guardian wrote diplomatically that the king has found the adjustment to reign challenging. Reuters was blunter: internal tensions between the royal couple appear to have resurfaced. But the public only saw the smiles, the polished performance of partnership. It wasn't the first time tension had crept into their marriage, but something about this was different. Camilla's independence, once celebrated as a sign of modernity, had become a cover for detachment. Her calendar overflowed with solo engagements, many at remote locations or private events unaccompanied by official press. The BBC noted the pattern, calling it a new approach to representation. But behind the scenes, it was seen as distance, a deliberate partitioning of lives once inseparable. I had always admired her discipline. Camilla's entire existence had been a masterclass in endurance, surviving decades of public scorn to emerge improbably as Queen Consort. She had built her redemption not through apologies, but through persistence. Yet that same steeliness now felt brittle. She had grown colder, less patient, more dismissive of those around her. Even the king's inner circle whispered that she seemed elsewhere. At first, Charles refused to acknowledge the cracks. His loyalty to her had been the bedrock of his emotional life for half a century. But even his patience has limits, and late one evening in early March, a senior aide overheard their voices rising through the closed door of his study. "You've made yourself a stranger in this house," Charles said sharply, according to that account later repeated in the Telegraph. To which Camilla replied almost flatly, "Perhaps it's the only way to survive it." The remark was telling, not defiant, not remorseful, but weary. For a woman who had spent her life fighting for legitimacy, survival had become habit. But what was she surviving now? Not the public who had grown used to her, not the press who treated her with polite neutrality, not even the institution which had finally accepted her. It seemed increasingly that she was surviving the life she had once coveted. Her Wiltshire estate became her sanctuary. The staff at Ray Mill spoke of a queen who arrived unannounced, stayed for days, and kept her schedule private. The king, meanwhile, would claim she was resting. Yet Al Jazeera later reported that these absences were unusually frequent and uncoordinated with the royal diary. There were even whispers of unofficial visitors to the estate, figures unlisted in the royal guest logs. When I returned to the palace one evening after a state event, I found Charles alone in the study, staring at a framed photo from their wedding. "She used to make me laugh," he said quietly. "Now she only makes me wonder." That line never left me. It was not anger that filled his voice. It was disbelief, the slow realization that affection might no longer be enough to keep the crown from cracking at its center. The first tabloid hints appeared shortly after. The Daily Mirror ran a speculative headline about unexplained absences, followed by The Guardian's more measured, a queen's solitude raises questions. The palace denied everything, calling the rumors fabrications rooted in routine separations. Yet inside, even those who defended her most fiercely had begun to ask, was the queen consort truly alone at Ray Mill? The smiles on that balcony, I realized later, were less an act of unity than a performance of denial, a final attempt to convince both themselves and the world that nothing had changed. But even as the cameras captured their silhouette against the summer sky, the fracture line between them deepened, invisible to all but those close enough to hear the silence that followed. It was the silence before discovery, before exposure. The kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from the heavy breath of secrets waiting to surface. Patterns, Wiltshire. A second phone. The first real clue came not from gossip or leaked documents, but from rhythm, from patterns that only those inside the palace could see. For all her poise and discipline, Camilla was a creature of habit. She preferred her breakfast at 8 sharp, her phone calls before noon, her engagements never later than dusk. But by late spring, those rhythms began to shift. Meetings moved abruptly, messages went unanswered, and her once predictable schedule became erratic. At first, her private secretary chalked it up to fatigue. "Her Majesty has been overextended," he told us during a staff briefing. But the truth was quieter and far more deliberate. Camilla's absences were growing both longer and stranger. Trips to Wiltshire once every few weeks became weekly retreats. The king stopped asking when she would return. He would simply glance at the empty chair during dinner, fold his napkin, and excuse himself with the same sentence each time she needs her space. The palace press office continued to issue a steady stream of benign engagements, literacy events, animal welfare fundraisers, quiet visits to countryside charities. Yet more than one of those appearances turned out to be private or off the record. When Reuters attempted to confirm an itinerary for a March charity event, the response came back oddly vague. "The Queen Consort's presence remains provisional," it read. That phrasing, the kind meant to protect flexibility, was the first public sign that her movements no longer followed royal coordination. Then came the phone. It was a second device unregistered through the palace IT department, discovered accidentally when a staff member mistook it for a misplaced aides phone during a private trip to Sandringham. It contained encrypted apps and private correspondence not logged in the royal archives. The phone was returned quietly to her, but its existence circulated among a handful of senior staff, and with it came questions. Why did the Queen Consort need an unregistered communication line? Who was she speaking to that required such secrecy? The BBC later described it as a communications anomaly. The Guardian called it a breach of palace transparency protocols. But those were tidy euphemisms for something more personal. The device had one primary contact saved under the initials JP. According to metadata later leaked to the press, JP was someone she contacted almost exclusively when away from London. The calls were frequent but short, less than 2 minutes each, and always at night. The logs coincided with her weekends at Ray Mill, the estate she had owned since before marrying Charles. It was her refuge, a place where she could shed the formality of court life. But in recent months, it had also become her hiding place. By early summer, the king's aides could no longer deny the unease. The Telegraph reported growing concerns about the Queen Consort's independent travel schedule. Behind closed doors, Charles's private secretary warned that irregular communications may pose security risks. Yet no one dared confront her directly. Camilla had always wielded a quiet power, the kind that made defiance look like bad manners. Even now, her smile disarmed critics before they could speak. But those closest to her sensed the change. Aides described her moods as volatile, her temper sharper, her sarcasm more cutting. She had once been the steady center of the king's emotional storm. Now she seemed to be weathering one of her own. A footman recalled her pacing through the Wiltshire drawing room late at night, glass in hand, murmuring to herself. She looked like someone arguing with a ghost, he said. Soon, coincidences began to pile up. Her charity visits near Bath were always within a few miles of a private medical practice. Her shopping trips aligned with conference dates for a prominent royal physician, retired, but still a consultant for the palace years earlier. The tabloids had yet to connect the dots, but whispers were spreading fast. At Windsor, Charles tried to keep focus on his duties, but even the most disciplined monarch cannot ignore intuition. When he asked her one morning about her long absences, she brushed it off with practiced ease. "You of all people should understand the need for solitude," she said, smiling faintly before leaving the room. The conversation ended there, but the unease did not. It wasn't long before the Guardian hinted at unverified allegations of growing emotional distance between the king and queen consort. Deutsche Welle noted unusual travel patterns inconsistent with past royal precedent. Even Al Jazeera, cautious in tone, reported a sudden privacy surrounding the queen consort's countryside engagements. Inside the palace, the atmosphere grew brittle. Staff avoided eye contact when her name came up. The king's schedule began separating from hers entirely. No shared engagements, no overlapping appearances. For the first time since their marriage, their public lives had diverged completely. But it was one of Camilla's former aides who told me what confirmed everyone's suspicions. She wasn't hiding guilt, the aide said. She was hiding confusion. She'd spent her life fighting for that crown. But once she got it, she realized she'd built herself a cage. That insight explained everything: the secrecy, the phone, the retreats to Wiltshire. It wasn't just about an affair. It was about escape. She was not plotting rebellion. She was reaching for something that felt alive again. Something outside the suffocating walls of duty and pretense. And yet, as the Times later observed, private rebellion is still betrayal when you wear the crown. Whether emotional or physical, her absence was eroding the image she had spent decades rebuilding. The second phone was never meant to be found. But once it existed, discovery became inevitable. And with it, the slow unraveling of the Queen's most carefully guarded secret: the doctor, the data trail. When the truth finally began to take shape, it wasn't unearthed by scandal-hungry tabloids or vengeful courtiers. It came from an investigation that started as a matter of national security. Palace cybersecurity staff worried that the Queen Consort's private communications could expose sensitive information, had quietly begun reviewing potential breaches. What they found was far from espionage, but it was explosive all the same. The calls from Camilla's second phone, the same unregistered device that had become a quiet legend among staff, were traced to a private number registered under Dr. James Pendry, a former royal physician. His name had appeared in archives of the royal household years earlier, particularly in medical briefings during the late Queen Elizabeth's reign. Pendry was known for discretion charm and a certain easy warmth that made him a favorite among senior royals. After his retirement, he had settled into private practice near Bath, the same region Camilla's private engagements often took her to. At first, the connection looked innocuous. Old acquaintances often stayed in touch with the royal household. But as analysts combed through phone metadata and geolocation patterns, the coincidences piled into a damning pattern. Pendry's phone records showed late-night calls from Wiltshire. His clinic's CCTV confirmed unregistered vehicles arriving after hours. Receipts from a nearby boutique hotel listed a C. Windsor under an alias too thin to fool anyone who cared to look. The BBC later summarized it carefully. Investigators discovered a personal correspondence between the Queen Consort and a former household physician. The nature of the relationship remains undisclosed. Reuters, less restrained, wrote, "A digital trail suggests an ongoing relationship between the Queen Consort and a retired royal doctor conducted outside official oversight." When the findings reached the king's private office, they were met with disbelief. Charles had always trusted her implicitly, even in moments when the public did not. But here was evidence that couldn't be dismissed as rumor. A senior aide described the meeting where the report was shown to him. He read it twice. Then he asked, "Is it conclusive?" They said yes, and he just stared at the window for several minutes. What followed was chaos, wrapped in silence. The palace did not move to confront Camilla immediately. Instead, it initiated what one Guardian columnist would later call an investigation into discretion. Every document, email, and itinerary tied to her movements was reviewed. The King's communications director contacted trusted allies at the Times and BBC to prepare for potential fallout, though both were instructed to hold publication indefinitely. The real breach, however, didn't come from the press. It came from technology. A freelance cybersecurity journalist working with sources connected to the palace obtained partial data logs showing encrypted calls between two devices. His report, published online under the headline, Private connections, a royal pattern. Hidden in plain sight went viral overnight. While it didn't name Camilla explicitly, the implication was unmistakable. The tabloids followed within hours. The next morning's papers were brutal. Daily Mail, The Queen's Secret Calls, The Sun Lover, or Leak Palace in Crisis. The Guardian, more restrained, asked, "Has the Queen's private life breached public trust?" The BBC opened its evening bulletin with the phrase, "Unverified reports of an inappropriate relationship." The story moved faster than Buckingham's ability to contain it. Photographers swarmed Ray Mill, snapping long-lens images of Camilla's empty driveway. Dr. Pendry vanished from public view, his clinic shuttered for refurbishment. Within 48 hours, the palace issued a terse statement. The Queen Consort remains committed to her duties. Matters of personal correspondence are private, but silence is not denial, and denial is not absolution. The king, for all his discretion, couldn't hide his devastation. Deutsche Welle captured it best. A monarch known for his restraint now carries the unmistakable weariness of personal betrayal. Behind closed doors, Charles reportedly confronted her in what one courtier described as a meeting colder than any winter. "You could have trusted me with anything," he told her, according to later accounts. Anything but deceit. Camilla's response was equally stark. "You trusted the crown more than you ever trusted me," she said. It was a line that would echo across the tabloids for weeks, a single sentence that distilled the tragedy of their partnership, a love once built on rebellion, now crumbling under the weight of royal expectation. Meanwhile, William and Anne, both furious at the damage to the monarchy's image, demanded decisive action. "This isn't personal anymore," William told advisors. "It's institutional. The public must see accountability." Within days, internal discussions began about scaling back Camilla's role, assigning her duties temporarily to Catherine. Public opinion, always fickle, turned sharply. Polls from YouGov showed her approval rating plummeting to its lowest point since her marriage. Older Britons, once her core supporters, voiced disappointment. Younger demographics were harsher. 72% agreed that Camilla's actions have undermined the king's credibility. Even Al Jazeera, typically diplomatic, aired a feature titled "The Price of Secrecy," when the private lives of royals become public liability. Commentators debated whether the monarchy could withstand another personal scandal so soon after Charles's accession. But for Camilla, the true punishment wasn't the headlines, it was the isolation that followed. The palace closed ranks. Her staff was reassigned. Her communications monitored, her every movement scrutinized. Ray Mill became both her sanctuary and her prison. There she spent nights replaying the events in her mind, aware that her entire life's work, the decades of endurance, the carefully rebuilt reputation, had unraveled in a single digital thread. As one palace source told The Times, she was the architect of her own invisibility. Now she's been consumed by it. What began as whispers of loneliness had become the most public betrayal of all. A queen undone not by enemies, but by the secrets she thought she could control. Tape confrontation, public shock. The recording arrived at dawn, slipped anonymously into the inboxes of half a dozen major news outlets under the subject line, "For the sake of truth." It contained just over 3 minutes of audio, clipped from a phone call between Camilla and Dr. James Pendry. Her voice was unmistakable, soft, low-tinged with that half-laugh she used when trying to sound unbothered. "I miss the quiet," she said. "No protocol, no cameras. Just you, the silence, and the way you make me feel like myself again." Within hours, the clip was everywhere. The Guardian tried to verify its authenticity, but admitted that the speaker's identity matches the Queen Consort in tone, phrasing, and recorded cadence. BBC News ran a cautious headline: "Audio leak raises questions over Queen's private correspondence." The tabloids dispensed with caution entirely. The Sun, "Love calls from the palace." The Mirror, "The voice that broke the king." By midday, it wasn't just gossip, it was a constitutional tremor. For a monarch barely 2 years into his reign, the scandal threatened not just his marriage, but his legitimacy. The palace communications team went into full lockdown mode. Access to senior staff was restricted, press calls were rerouted through the Lord Chamberlain's office. The usual mantra, "never complain, never explain," was no longer a shield. It was a liability. Inside Buckingham, the atmosphere felt apocalyptic. The king's private secretary moved between offices with the tense gait of a man carrying too many secrets. Anne arrived unannounced from Gatcombe Park and went straight to her brother's study. William followed later, his face drawn, his voice low but unwavering. I was there that afternoon, standing outside the room as the shouting began. "You've got to act," William said, his tone clipped, deliberate. "This isn't just about reputation. It's about stability." Charles hesitated. For a lifetime, he had endured storms, divorce scandal, ridicule, and had always found refuge in Camilla. But this was different. It wasn't a tabloid's invention. It was her voice, her words, her betrayal. "She says she wanted to feel alive," he murmured. "What does that make me then?" Anne's reply was brutal in its honesty. "It makes you the king, and the king can't afford sentiment." Later that evening, palace sources confirmed what many suspected. Charles had ordered Camilla to leave Windsor and return to Ray Mill until further notice. The BBC called it a temporary withdrawal from public duties. Reuters went further. King Charles requests Queen Consort's departure amid trust crisis. Outside the palace gates, reporters and cameras lined the streets. Crowds gathered not in anger, but in bewilderment. For a monarchy that had fought so hard to project unity, the spectacle of fracture was both surreal and familiar. When Camilla finally left Windsor, the scene was almost cinematic. A black car pulled through the courtyard as flashbulbs erupted like lightning. She didn't wave. She didn't look up. She sat motionless, her expression unreadable behind tinted glass. One photographer captured a single tear slipping down her cheek. Whether real or refracted light, no one could say. Inside the palace, Charles walked through his private apartments in near silence. He was seen clutching a single letter, a handwritten note reportedly from her delivered just before she left. "You asked for honesty," it read. "This is what it looks like." The story dominated international headlines. Al Jazeera described it as the monarchy's most intimate crisis since Diana. Deutsche Welle warned that the scandal risks reigniting questions about transparency and privilege. American outlets turned it into spectacle. CNN called it royal fallout: the king, the queen, and the doctor. Public sympathy split sharply. Older Britons mourned the collapse of a once resilient love story, while younger audiences saw it as proof that the monarchy's gilded facade was cracking again. Social media turned the scandal into a moral referendum. Hashtags like Camilla Gate and Palace Betrayal trended for days. Memes flooded the internet, images of crowns split in half, of telephones shaped like daggers. Every joke carried a vein of discomfort. At Balmoral, Charles retreated from view. Officially, he was reflecting in private. In reality, he was wrestling with betrayal duty and the slow erosion of the life he had built around her. Aides described him as haunted. "He speaks less," one said to The Times. "He spends hours walking alone, rereading old letters." Meanwhile, William moved decisively. He convened senior advisors to restructure the royal communication chain. "This must never happen again," he declared. Policies were introduced to limit personal devices within royal residences, to centralize security monitoring, to create an internal code of digital conduct. The reforms, though necessary, carried a bitter irony. They institutionalized mistrust within the very family that embodied tradition. Camilla, from her exile at Ray Mill, refused interviews and issued no statements. Yet she remained defiant. A friend quoted her in the Telegraph, "They'll crucify me again, but I've survived worse." That much was true. Her entire life had been a battle between private desire and public expectation. But this time, there was no redemption arc waiting at the end, only silent scrutiny and solitude. Within a week, the affair had moved from scandal to state concern. The Cabinet Office requested security briefings on potential data breaches, given the involvement of a former royal physician with access to confidential information. "It's not about romance anymore," one official told Reuters. "It's about vulnerability." The monarchy once again had become a national security risk, and so the story that began with whispers of loneliness now stood as a full-blown crisis of trust. The woman who had built her life on endurance was undone, not by hatred, but by hunger for freedom, for affection, for something unscripted. As I watched the headlines fade into history's relentless cycle, I realized that for Camilla, this was never about infidelity in the ordinary sense. It was about rebellion, the final act of a woman who had spent her entire life confined by the roles others wrote for her. But rebellion within a monarchy is treason by another name. Exile reforms what survives. In the weeks that followed, silence became both weapon and refuge. The palace imposed a news blackout. No photographs, no updates, no statements beyond the now familiar refrain. The king continues his duties as planned. Yet even as the official narrative froze, the nation could feel the undercurrent shifting. Something irreversible had broken not only between Charles and Camilla, but within the monarchy itself. At Ray Mill, reporters camped along the hedgerows for weeks, waiting for a glimpse of the queen consort turned pariah. The few photographs that emerged painted a haunting tableau. Camilla walking her dogs at dusk, shoulders hunched, her face half hidden beneath a scarf. There was no defiance this time, no polished smile to reassure the press. She looked like someone who had finally stopped fighting the storm and chosen to let it pass over her. The Guardian described her disappearance as a royal vanishing act. Reuters called it a retreat into self-imposed isolation. Deutsche Welle noted simply, "Her absence has restored calm, but not trust." Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, reform became the new mantra. William and Anne worked with the Privy Council to draft the first Royal Communications Code, an internal framework that would govern every message call and digital correspondence within the royal household. Personal devices were banned from private quarters. All engagements, even personal visits, now required written clearance. It was a bureaucratic fortress designed to prevent another scandal, but in doing so, it sealed the monarchy behind walls higher than ever before. Charles approved every measure, though those closest to him said it felt less like leadership and more like penance. The king had always believed in humanizing the monarchy, allowing emotion, vulnerability, and forgiveness to coexist with duty. Now his faith in those ideals had been shattered by the very woman who had once embodied them. BBC News reported that the king's demeanor had changed, noticeably less accessible, more formal, his humor replaced by restraint. During a visit to York, when a journalist asked about the queen consort, he paused for a moment too long before replying, "Her Majesty is taking time to reflect." The phrase, repeated across headlines, became a national euphemism for disgrace. For Camilla, exile was not punishment so much as inevitability. She had built her redemption story on endurance, but endurance, when stretched too far, becomes detachment. Alone at Ray Mill, she spent her days in the rhythm of quiet repetition, gardening, reading, sending letters to charities she could no longer visit. The few confidants who remained described her as serene but unreachable. One told The Telegraph, "She's not seeking forgiveness. She's seeking silence." Public opinion once again softened with time. Britain has always had a peculiar affection for its fallen royals. Sympathy rose as scandal fatigue set in. Al Jazeera framed it best: "The queen who defied convention has become the woman defined by it." For every critic demanding her title be revoked, there were others who saw her as yet another casualty of a system that consumes its own. The monarchy, for its part, adjusted quickly. Catherine's visibility grew, her natural composure serving as the perfect antidote to the chaos. William's approval ratings soared. The public narrative reoriented toward the next generation, a clean slate for an institution desperate for stability. Behind closed doors, however, Charles remained haunted. Aides spoke of him retreating to Highgrove late at night, sitting alone in the garden greenhouse where he once shared tea with Camilla before dawn engagements. "He doesn't speak of her," one gardener said quietly, "but he keeps her chair." Then 3 months after her exile came the letter. Handwritten, delivered privately to the palace, it contained no apology, just clarity. "We both mistook love for salvation. Perhaps what we really needed was distance. Take care of the crown. It's all that truly belongs to either of us." Charles read it alone, folded it carefully, and placed it in the same drawer that held her old notes from decades earlier, those from the years when their love had been forbidden, reckless, and alive. The cycle, it seemed, had come full circle. By autumn, Parliament briefly debated whether her formal style, Her Majesty the Queen Consort, should remain. Ultimately, it did, though in name only. She no longer attended engagements, no longer appeared in photographs. Her portrait, which once hung in the white drawing room, was quietly moved to a private gallery in Clarence House. History was already beginning to blur her edges. The Times summed up her legacy with reluctant precision. Camilla's fall is not the story of betrayal, but of exhaustion, proof that endurance alone cannot redeem what trust has lost. Still, she was never publicly vilified in the way others had been. There was no mob, no formal stripping of title. Just erasure, polite, quiet British erasure. From time to time, new photos surfaced, a blurry shot of her attending a small village fete, a report of her visiting an animal shelter under a pseudonym. She looked older, freer, and somehow lighter, as if the weight of public expectation had finally fallen away. As I reflect on it now, I realize her exile was not truly an ending, but a return to the private woman she had been before crowns, before scandal, before survival became identity. In losing everything, she had, in a strange way, reclaimed herself. History will debate her motives, her morality, her mistakes. Some will call her ambitious, others tragic. But to me, Camilla will always represent the monarchy's cruel paradox, the institution that demands loyalty above love, and then punishes those who confuse the two. In the end, the crown endured as it always does. But it carried the faint echo of her voice, a reminder that even those who wear it are still human, still fallible, still capable of loving too much and too wrongly. And perhaps in some quiet way that's what will survive her. Not the scandal, not the shame, but the lesson that endurance without truth is only another kind of exile.